What happens when a seemingly harmless conversation about celebrity gossip becomes a brutal, televised trial on the very nature of love itself? What happens when a polite difference of opinion descends into a cruel and public dissection of a woman's life, all under the unforgiving glare of studio lights and the watchful eyes of millions? The air in the studio was thick with its usual manufactured warmth, a confection of hot lights, atomized hairspray, and the faint, sweet scent of caffeinated ambition. The audience, a vibrant sea of carefully chosen daytime faces, hummed with a low, anticipatory energy, ready to be entertained, to laugh, to perhaps even feel a pang of recognition in the lives of the women seated before them on the brightly colored, aggressively comfortable set. The topic, as it so often was, began as a feather-light morsel of Hollywood hearsay, a rumor about the impending separation of Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban after nearly 2 decades of marriage. It was presented as a curiosity, a talking point, wrapped in the glossy packaging of fame. The host, with a well-practiced look of sympathetic concern, tossed the gilded grenade onto the table, framing it around the pressures of separate lives, of international filming commitments and relentless touring schedules. It was a safe, relatable problem, scaled up to a celebrity level, a perfect, harmless catalyst for the day's discussion. And then, the question was directed at Sinatra, a woman whose composure was as much a signature as the thoughtful intelligence in her eyes. But there's one person on the panel who thinks that might actually be a good thing for a relationship. Isn't there, Sinatra? The invitation was casual, an open door to a personal anecdote. Sinatra smiled, a gentle, unassuming expression that gave no hint of the battleground that was about to be drawn. She leaned into her microphone, her posture relaxed, her voice a calm and measured current in the babbling brook of morning television. Well, right, she began, the preface a soft clearing of the throat before laying her private life out for public consumption. Let me just state for the record, without wanting to sound like some sort of radical, that me and Scott, who I've mentioned quite a lot on this show, have been together for 14 years. She paused, letting the number settle. 14 years, a significant tenure in any world, a near eternity in the fickle landscape of modern relationships. The audience murmured in appreciation. There was a sense of solidity about her, a quiet confidence that made people lean in. And when we first met, she continued, her hands resting lightly on the desk before her, we decided we weren't going to uproot our kids. So we chose to live separately. We lived together, apart. The phrase hung in the air, a charming paradox. You could feel the gears turning in the minds of the audience. He lives in his house in Kent. I live in my house in Bristol with our children. We do a week together and a week apart when they're with their other parent. It worked great for a long, long time. Her explanation was simple, practical, devoid of drama. It was the story of 2 people making a conscious, loving choice for the sake of their family. A jigsaw puzzle pieced together with care and consideration. She spoke of the present, of how their children were now grown, young adults of 20, 21, and 23, and how this new chapter meant they had to reevaluate their carefully constructed arrangement. We really haven't got an excuse not to live with each other now, she admitted, a soft, almost wistful laugh in her voice. So we have had to now look at each other and go, oh, our jigsaw puzzle's about to change. You'd do because it's worked so well for us. She was disarmingly honest, vulnerable even, sharing the quiet anxieties that come with change. She acknowledged her own career, the time spent away from home. I don't film internationally abroad like Nicole Kidman all the time, but I'm away a lot. A fellow panelist, Jane, chimed in supportively. You've been in Belgium a bit. Sinatra nodded, grateful for the affirmation. I have been in Belgium a bit. I go to Prague next week. There are a few things I do work away from home, but it was so difficult to do it as a mother that as a wife. It feels like kind of a breath of fresh air to be able to go and come back and have a conversation with Scott about what I've done. Her words painted a picture not of separation, but of a different kind of connection, one that thrived on reunion, on stories shared, on the joy of coming back together. I think we work better as a long-distance couple, she concluded, the admission sounding strange even to her own ears. But I think I have kinda got the best of both worlds. As the old saying goes, how can I miss you if you don't go away? Her point was met with nods of understanding and a gentle ripple of applause. It was a thoughtful, modern perspective on love and partnership. Then the camera turned to Isabel. Where Sinatra was calm and composed, Isabel was a tightly coiled spring of fervent conviction. Her hands were clasped together on the desk, her knuckles white. Her eyes burned with an intensity that seemed almost out of place in the light-hearted context of the show. She leaned forward, her entire body a testament to the singular truth she was about to impart. "We have the opposite," she declared, her voice a stark contrast to Sinetra's measured tones. "Well, I've talked about this a lot. I mean, I am very codependent, and I think Jeremy and I just want to be together all the time." The confession was stark, a flag planted firmly in the soil of absolute togetherness. "Well, I definitely want to be with him all the time," she corrected herself with a nervous laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm not sure he would say the same." The audience chuckled, a brief release of the tension she had just introduced, but Isabel was not joking. She was laying down a manifesto. "I think we like to go off and work separately, but in the evenings, we do really pride ourselves on having dinner together. That's really sacred to us. And my marriage is really sacred." The word sacred was delivered with the force of a sacrament, elevating her personal choice to the level of a moral imperative. She described her old-fashioned, handwritten diary, open in her office for her husband to check, to schedule, to ensure they were together. "We will schedule things to stay, to make sure we are together most of the time," she insisted. When asked if he would travel with her for a job, her answer was swift and absolute. "Yeah, he would either come with me or I just wouldn't go. And I will always check in with him if I have a job." Wow. The single word, wow, hung in the air, a whispered comment from another panelist, a tiny puncture in the balloon of Isabel's certainty, but she was undeterred. "Even coming on loose today, I was like, am I available? Have we got my marriage is number one and work and everything else?" Her voice trailed off, the implication clear. Her life, her career, her very presence on that panel was secondary, subject to her husband's schedule. My marriage is literally the priority for me," she finished, her chin held high, "and I'm very strict about it." A palpable silence fell over the studio. The air, once light and convivial, was now heavy with unspoken judgment. It was Jane who broke it, her tone laced with a dry, almost theatrical horror. "I'm feeling like quite suffocated just listening to you," she exhaled, fanning herself with her hand. It was a joke, a deflection, but it was also the truth. The audience laughed, louder this time, a wave of nervous energy breaking against the shore of Isabel's intensity. They were laughing with Jane, not Isabel. A subtle but significant shift had occurred. Isabel, for the first time, looked slightly flustered, her conviction momentarily shaken by the open disbelief of her colleague. She attempted a weak retort, a jab at Jane's own well-known husband. "You're married to Jeremy, though," she muttered, as if the name itself was an explanation. Jane waved it away. "No, I'm married to Jason. And Jane knows what that means," she laughed, gesturing to the other panelist, sharing an inside joke that further excluded Isabel. Jane then offered her own, more balanced perspective. She spoke of being single through her 20s and 30s, of developing an independent life before meeting her husband at 39. A photo flashed up on the screen behind them, a cheerful, slightly chaotic image from a St. Patrick's Day party. "Oh, look at the state of us," Jane groaned good-naturedly. "It's probably better that we do live apart sometimes." She framed her relationship not as separate but as parallel. "I'd like to think of it not as separate lives. I think that we lead parallel lives. And I spend a lot of time in London. He spends a lot of time in Somerset because he has to travel abroad a lot." She described the secret joy she felt when her husband had to go away. "When he says to me, 'Oh, I've got to go away, to Ukraine for 10 days, I'm like, oh, that's such a shame.'" Her mock sympathy was perfect, earning a warm laugh from the crowd. "Yes," she mouthed theatrically, "but it's not because I don't want to see him. It's just that I just like time on my own." She was articulating the quiet need for solitude that many in the audience, and certainly on the panel, understood implicitly. It was the desire to retreat into one's own space, to be responsible for no one but oneself for a short while. "I think I would just not be able to survive that level of exposure," she said, her gaze flickering briefly, almost unconsciously towards Isabel. The implication was clear. She then recounted with self-deprecating humor the disastrous state of her life after her husband had been away for 10 days, the messy house, the skinny dog, a diet of carrot sticks and hummus. "So it's not that you're codependent," another panelist quipped. "It's that you're totally dependent on your husband for basic survival." The table erupted in laughter, the tension once again diffused by humor. The conversation seemed to be finding its equilibrium again, a gentle exploration of different relationship dynamics. The host read a comment from a viewer named Lee, a woman in a long-distance relationship with a boyfriend from Italy whom she saw only every 3 or 4 months. "We're still absolutely so in love," the message concluded. "Communication, honesty, and trust are the biggest factors." It was a heartfelt, affirming message, a real-world echo of the very lifestyle Sinetra had described. It was a validation, And for Isabel, it was a spark to a fuse. The host turned, posing the question innocently to Isabel. You see, so how would you cope with that? And that was when the mask of civility finally, irrevocably, shattered. Isabel's face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated contempt. She threw her hands up in the air, a gesture of such theatrical dismissal that it sent a shockwave through the studio. What's the point? She spat out the words dripping with scorn. The audience fell silent. The playful banter, the laughter, the gentle camaraderie, it all evaporated in an instant. There was only the cold, hard cruelty of her disdain. What's the point? She repeated, her voice rising, now laced with a genuine angry bewilderment. I just don't get it. Her eyes, blazing with a righteous fire, locked onto Sinetra. This was no longer a general discussion. It was a targeted assault. I've had relationships where... like my longest relationship before Jeremy was 7 years, she began, her voice taking on the sharp, lecturing tone of someone delivering a harsh, unwanted truth. And I guarantee I was probably with that guy, probably 3 months of the 7 years, because he was on location filming. I was on location filming. We never saw each other. She leaned back, a sneer playing on her lips. Like I don't even think I knew who he was in the end. Who is that person? Her words were a weapon, designed to invalidate Sinetra's 14-year partnership, to reduce it to a hollow sham, a relationship with a stranger. She was not just disagreeing. She was judging, condemning, and attempting to humiliate. The other panelists froze. Their smiles vanished. Jane shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her hand hovering, as if she wanted to reach out and stop the onslaught, but didn't know how. Linda, who had been quiet until now, looked down at her lap, a shadow of discomfort on her face. A thick, suffocating silence descended upon the audience. You could hear a pin drop. They had come for light entertainment and had instead been made witnesses to an act of public cruelty. In that moment, Sinatra was utterly alone, isolated in the crosshairs of Isabel's vitriol. She sat there absorbing the attack, her face a serene, unreadable mask. The camera held on her, waiting for the crack, the tear, the angry retort. But it didn't come. She simply held her ground, a silent, dignified island in a sea of hostility. The tension was a physical presence in the room, a taut wire stretched to its breaking point. Jane, ever the diplomat, saw the precipice and tried to pull everyone back. She turned to Sinatra, her voice deliberately gentle, a stark contrast to Isabel's shrill attack. She referenced her own earlier point about finding independence before a relationship could truly flourish. I think I got really scared when I was single, because whenever I felt like I really needed someone, it was always a disastrous relationship, Jane mused. Her words a soothing balm on the raw wound Isabel had just inflicted. And it was only when I discovered that I could be independent, I could be on my own, I could be perfectly happy on my own, and so someone else was just like a really nice addition, like the sort of icing on the cake. That was quite an important realization. Then she did something remarkable. She didn't just share her experience. She built a bridge directly to Sinatra, offering her a lifeline of solidarity. She looked at her pointedly, a small, encouraging smile on her face, and said, I think you probably agree with that. It was an act of profound kindness, a public alignment against the bully. It was permission for Sinatra to speak, not in her own defense, but from a position of shared strength. The focus of the room shifted. Everyone looked at Sinatra, who took a slow, deliberate breath. The serene mask fell away, replaced not by anger but by a quiet, formidable strength. Her eyes, clear and direct, met the camera's gaze. This was no longer about her. It was about something much larger. Yeah, she began, her voice low but resonant, cutting through the thick atmosphere like a bell. No, absolutely. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of deep conviction. She acknowledged Linda, who had just mentioned her amicable divorce from her ex-husband Gary. You know, Gary and I went to the cinema together on Saturday night, Linda had said. We're still mates. Sinatra nodded at her. I think if you throw away the friendship after that many years, it's silly. You know, you keep the good part. Then she turned her attention, not with anger, but with a kind of sad, clinical precision, back to the core of the argument. She looked past Isabel, addressing the audience, the camera, and anyone who had ever felt judged for the shape of their own heart. Her voice did not rise. It did not waver. It simply held a profound and unshakable truth. I think the idea that a relationship must look a certain way to be valid is the most dangerous myth we tell ourselves, she began. Her words carefully chosen, each one landing with the force of a perfectly placed stone. The studio was utterly silent now, captivated. Even Isabel seemed momentarily stunned into stillness, her attack having created a platform for a response she could never have anticipated. This idea that love is measured only in proximity, in a shared roof and a shared diary is a profound misunderstanding of what it means to connect. To build a life with another human being, Sinatra continued. She unfolded her hands and rested them on the desk, palms down, a gesture of grounding, of claiming her space. My life with Scott is not a compromise. It is not second best. It is not what's left over when the real relationship isn't available. It is a choice. It is a deliberate, joyful, and deeply loving architecture we built together for us. It is a testament to trust, not a lack of commitment. She spoke of her identity, not as a singular entity called wife, but as a complex and multifaceted person. I am a mother. I'm a professional. I am a friend. I'm a woman who, like Jane, cherishes and needs time on her own to hear her own thoughts, to be herself without reference to anyone else. None of those parts of me are diminished by my marriage. They are all honored by it. Scott doesn't just love the part of me that is his wife. He loves the woman who goes to Belgium, the mother who raised her children, the individual who existed long before he met her and who he wants to see flourish. Her gaze was unwavering, filled with a powerful, quiet passion. You ask, what's the point? She said, finally allowing her eyes to meet Isabel's. There was no venom in her look, only a deep, penetrating clarity. The point is respect. The point is celebrating each other's independence, not fearing it. The point is having a life so rich that when you do come together, you bring a world of new experiences to share. The point is building a bond so strong it doesn't need constant validation by physical presence. It is a magnetism, a pull that works across distance, that is chosen again and again every day. It's not about how you can miss someone if they don't go away. It's about how you can find yourself so you have a whole person to bring back. As she spoke, a remarkable transformation occurred in the room. The audience, which had been a collective of passive observers, became an active participant in the drama. Women began nodding, their expressions of shock replaced by ones of deep recognition. A quiet murmur of, yes, and that's right, started to ripple through the rows. A woman in the third row wiped a tear from her eye. They were not just hearing a defense of an unconventional marriage. They were hearing a defense of their own choices, their own need for space, their own multifaceted lives. Sinatra was speaking for them, giving voice to a truth many of them felt but rarely saw articulated with such grace and power. When she finished, the silence that followed was different. It was not the heavy, awkward silence of before, but a deep, resonant silence of respect. It lasted for a heartbeat, too, and then it was broken. A single person in the back began to clap, then another, and then, like a tidal wave, applause swept through the entire studio. It wasn't the polite, prompted applause of a typical daytime show. It was a roar. It was a standing ovation. People were on their feet, their faces turned to Sinatra, their hands coming together in a thunderous expression of support and gratitude. The cameras, caught off guard, frantically tried to capture the scene. A wide shot showed the entire studio on its feet. A close-up caught Jane and Linda clapping enthusiastically, their faces beaming with pride. And then the shot that told the whole story, a tight close-up on Isabel. Her face was a frozen tableau of shock and disbelief. The color had drained from her cheeks. She looked around, searching for an ally, a friendly face, but found none. Every eye, every camera, every ounce of energy in the room was focused on the woman she had tried to diminish. In that moment, Isabel was utterly and completely alone, isolated on an island of her own making, her cruel words having backfired in the most spectacular and public way imaginable. Her certainty had crumbled, her sacred truths exposed as narrow and unforgiving. She had lost the audience, her colleagues, and the moral high ground in the space of a single magnificent speech. She looked down at her perfectly manicured hands, now lying limp on the desk, a silent admission of her total and utter defeat. The roar of the crowd was the only verdict that mattered. The roar of the crowd was a physical entity, a living thing that filled every inch of the studio. It was a sound of catharsis, a collective exhalation of breath that had been held in 1,000 chests. The applause was not merely for Sinatra's eloquence, but for the profound truth she had illuminated. The simple, yet revolutionary idea that love could have more than one shape, more than one valid expression. In the control room, a space of hushed panic and professional adrenaline, the director was shouting commands, his voice a staccato rhythm against the wall of sound from the studio floor. Hold on her! Stay on Sinatra! Give me a close-up now! Get the tears in that woman's eyes in row 3. Now pan to Isabel! I want a 2-shot. Sinatra in focus, Isabel blurred in the background. Show me the story. And the story was written on every face. Jane and Linda were clapping with an almost fierce joy, their support for Sinatra absolute and unequivocal. Jane reached across the desk and briefly, firmly, squeezed Sinatra's arm, a gesture of solidarity that was more potent than any words. It said, "You are not alone. We are with you." "Thank you." Sinetra, for her part, received the adulation not with triumph, but with a deep, humbling grace. A faint, almost weary smile touched her lips as she gave a slight, acknowledging nod to the audience. Her eyes were luminous, holding not the fire of a victor, but the steady, quiet light of someone who had spoken her truth and been heard. Meanwhile, Isabel sat in the heart of the storm, yet utterly untouched by its warmth. The sound of the ovation seemed to wash over her, a torrent of noise that did not cleanse, but instead threatened to drown her. Her posture was ramrod straight, a brittle defense against the overwhelming tide of disapproval. A rictus of a smile was plastered on her face, a horrifying mannequin-like expression that didn't reach her eyes. Her eyes, wide and glassy, darted back and forth from the cheering audience to the supportive faces of her colleagues, finding no quarter, no refuge. She was a queen deposed, left stranded in the middle of a court that had unanimously and enthusiastically thrown their allegiance to another. In that moment, she was the loneliest person in a room of hundreds, a stark silhouette of judgment in a landscape suddenly flooded with empathy. The host, a professional adept at navigating the choppy waters of live television, finally saw an opening as the applause began to subside. Her face was a mask of strained neutrality, her job to stitch the torn fabric of the show back together as seamlessly as possible. She forced a bright, brittle smile. "Wow," she said, her voice artificially loud. "Lots of passion on this subject." It was a desperate understatement, a flimsy piece of tape slapped over a gaping wound. She fumbled with her cue cards, her eyes avoiding both Sinetra's and Isabel's. "Well, I think we can all agree. Everyone's different," she chirped, throwing out the age-old platitude like a life raft. "Horses for courses." The phrase landed in the emotionally charged atmosphere with a dull thud. It was an attempt to neutralize the moment, to reduce Sinetra's profound statement on human dignity and Isabel's cruel interrogation to a simple matter of taste, like choosing between tea and coffee. The audience, still buzzing with the emotional aftershock, responded with a few scattered, half-hearted claps. The host's attempt to restore normalcy had only highlighted how abnormal the preceding minutes had been. Seeing her opening, Isabel leaned forward, her desperate smile still fixed in place. She had to say something, to reclaim some ground, to prove she had not been vanquished. "I just think," she began, her voice thin and reedy, a pale imitation of its earlier strident force, "I just think you have to be careful. If you're living completely separate lives, at one point, what do you have in common? You have to build things together." Her words, which might have sounded reasonable in a different context, now sounded pathetic and defensive. She was no longer a confident arbiter of how relationships should be. She was a wounded animal, lashing out with worn-out arguments. Sinetra didn't even turn to look at her. She simply addressed the host's earlier comment, her voice once again calm and clear, effortlessly reclaiming the narrative. "I don't think we live completely separate lives," she corrected gently, refusing to accept Isabel's framing. "That's the point. The term parallel lives is great. We're both independent in what we can do in our lives, but we choose to be with each other when we have that time to spend. Scott is the only person I want to spend my time with in that way. But equally," she paused, letting the word hang in the air, a final, crucial clarification, "I equally really cherish and value the time that I have on my own, in my working life and my mothering life. All those other parts of me also don't necessarily need him to be with me all the time. For me, it's about finding a magnetism that works because we choose to click." It was a final, elegant summation, a closing argument delivered with such unassailable logic and grace that it left no room for rebuttal. The host, sensing the segment was spiraling away from her again, jumped in. "Very interesting," she declared, her voice ringing with finality. "We have to go to a break, but when we come back—" But Sinetra wasn't quite finished. In a gesture of quiet authority that silenced the host mid-sentence, she slowly raised her hand, not for permission to speak, but to signal that she had one final thing to say. The studio, which had begun to rustle with the anticipation of a commercial break, fell silent once more. Every crew member, every audience member, every person on that panel froze. Sinetra turned her body slightly, bypassing her colleagues, bypassing the host, and looked directly into the lens of the main camera. In that moment, she was no longer a panelist on a daytime chat show. She was speaking to every single person watching at home, to anyone who had ever felt small or judged, or different. "There is no single correct map for the human heart," she said, her voice imbued with a profound and gentle wisdom. "We are all navigating our own territory, with our own landscapes of joy and sorrow, of need and independence. And the only compass that will ever truly guide us, the only one we should ever use when looking at another person's journey, is kindness." Her eyes held the camera, creating an intimacy that transcended the millions of miles of cable and broadcast signals separating her from her audience. When we draw rigid lines in the sand and declare, "This is the only right way to love, this is the only right way to live," we are not building a sanctuary. We are building a prison for others, and eventually a prison for ourselves. The greatest gift we can give each other is not judgment, but respect. It is the grace to allow someone else's happiness to look different from our own. She held her gaze for a final, powerful second, then leaned back in her chair, the statement complete. A deep collective sigh seemed to pass through the audience. There was no applause this time. The moment was too sacred for that. It was an ending, a moral conclusion to a story that had unfolded live before their very eyes. The host, visibly moved and momentarily forgetting her role, simply stared at Sinatra before shaking her head slightly, as if to clear it. She found her voice, now softer, more subdued. "We'll be right back," she whispered into the camera, and the screen faded to black. In the half-light of the studio during the commercial break, the tableau on the set told the final story. As the floor manager began to move around, Sinatra sat quietly, a strange peace settling over her features. She looked exhausted, as if she had run a marathon, but she was serene. Jane and Linda had moved their chairs closer, their bodies forming a protective circle around her, their quiet conversation a murmur of support and admiration. Across the desk, in a world of her own, Isabel sat stiffly, gathering her script pages with hands that trembled almost imperceptibly. She did not look up. She did not speak. She simply focused on the papers in front of her. The rustling sound, a tiny, pathetic noise in the vast, echoing silence that now surrounded her. The bright, aggressive woman who had sought to humiliate another had been rendered small, invisible, diminished not by an attack but by a quiet, unyielding display of dignity. What had begun as a frivolous piece of celebrity gossip had, in the space of 22 minutes, become a profound and unforgettable lesson. It was a stark reminder that true strength is not found in the ferocity of one's judgment or the volume of one's convictions. It's found in the quiet courage to live one's own truth and the boundless grace to honor the truth of others. As the lights came up for the next segment, one woman on the panel shone with an inner luminescence, a symbol of grace under fire, while another seemed to shrink into the shadows. A poignant, lonely testament to the fact that cruelty, in the end, is a weapon that always wounds the one who wields it.